Okay, Maya, we are all yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Raffaella. My name is Maya Minder. I'm an artist from Switzerland. I'm very happy to be here today at ARTCaffe. As Raffaella mentioned, I just participated at the ICEA conference, which is an exhibition really specialized on art and science. It is scientists who are organizing these events together with Nabi Art Center, and there has been a lot of conferences, shows, and events where for example, we visited the XR studios in Hannam, San. So we had a bit of this experience of LED screens with K-pop, and it's been a very exciting time and also a bit of a tiring time. So I hope I can contribute the most for giving a bit of talk and speech and introduce a bit to my work. I'm an artist. I work with food as a material. I mainly do installation, video, and performances as well. And when I talk about food or eat art, maybe one of the references could be Daniel Spöri, which is a Swiss artist who became known in the 30s, 40s, 60s. And he actually, what he did is he took the dinner table, which of his dinners with his friends, and he just made them last forever and hung them 90 degrees up on the wall. So it has been a pioneer also working with food as a media and telling about how food is also interacting with our society, right? I always say that we can go to lectures and talks, but the conversations that we have at the dinner table is really more the conversations that we also lead in a more private setting, right? So it's more intimate, more sharing secrets, and more sharing a subjective view of what the topic is. And food for me is also, as a female and maybe feminist art, is a topic that I want to introduce nowadays into the society. Of course, food is in the future is going to be one of the biggest topics around the world because we are living in times of scarcity and the climate change, environmental change, and it's going to be a big topic how we're going to solve those issues in a globalized food system as well, right? So I started with the art of fermentation, saying that I'm half Korean as a background. I studied art history as first, then went into art practice, and I always ate a lot of kimchi from my mother's table. And she just gave me this since a child into my mouth, and then it was always there. And I never took so much attention to it, like this kimchi thing, just stinking, gives you a bad breath afterward. You have to clean your tooth. And in school, you maybe people ask you why you smell like garlic. But it was the kimchi or also the seaweed soups and the 청국장 and all those very interesting smells that I neglected in the beginning. But within my art practice, I also started to discover. And it was in this first installation that I did, which was called Gasthaus Fermentation and Bacteria, where I created a table setting. And in this table setting, I put the spotlights on the the fermented drinks, the kimchis, which were standing in the middle of the table. So I wanted to draw the attention not to the humans, like as from performance art, like not me and myself, but really on the agency of microbial life, right? And we all know kimchi nowadays, since COVID at least, that those things are very healthy and we need them. They're probiotic and they're helping us a lot to also they have a connection to our brain, especially in our emotional stabilities, about how we keep our immune system in a healthy state. And so while I was fermenting and practicing this on a culinary level, really digging deep into fermentation practices and trying out recipes from around the world, I also was reading a lot of scientific articles on the topic of the microbiome, right? And the research on microbiome has been just maybe about 20 years. because before the microbiome was super underestimated, since the gut is a more uncanny organ that we have, right? It's uncanny in a sense that a lot of parasites live there. There's the speech that it has when we go to the toilet, right? And I think in Western medicine perspective, it was always more attractive to study neural systems, right, instead of the gut, right? But so to say, the gut is as important as the brain, as I mentioned before. And as an organ, it is actually as wide and spreading out like two tennis fields, right? We have the skin, which is one organ that is very important, which is protecting us from our environment. But the gut itself is also an organ that is protecting ourselves from the environment, but by the intake of food, right? And this is something I also perceive through my Asian backgrounds, that in Asia you have a different perception of what food is. Food is remedy, food is medicine, food is prevention of disease, right? And we are somehow communicating with our environment, our nature, the agricultural system through when we eat as well. And I always thought it's very fascinating to say that humans are sculpting landscapes by the way what we eat, right? So we as an end consumer, we take active choices of what we choose, what we cook and how we cook, if we order our food or if we also transmit the knowledge of the kitchen towards the next generations. And so I think that's one of the beautiful things to say, that within within this history of mankind, cooking was always the heart of the house, right? It was the heart of the intimate space. It was the heart of the family as well. And the family was gathering around the kitchen table. And and this kind of science, I would say, it's also a science, right? You know how to prepare your food, but also the knowledge about what is edible as well has been a knowledge that has been produced within hundred thousands of years. So my practice is really a lot about knowledge transformation. So I'm actively transforming system thinkings of science, of like a feminist perspective, also in a political way of like how food is important in our systems, in our society, and especially in a capitalist society as well. So here what you see is a picture of a handprint of a child after playing on a playground, right? And it's a picture that has been growing the bacteria and the microorganisms that the child has been taking with himself from the playground, because we always say the kids, they have to wash their hands after the playground. It's very important. But it's somehow, for me, it's kind of nice depiction of the diversity of those invisible agents, right? And like we know how microorganisms are causing disease. We are much afraid of them. We learned that we have to disinfect before we eat, when we come home. And I think there's also a different narration that talks about how those microorganisms are really important for the coexistence of humans with nature, with agricultural system, with the living healthy soils that we have, and also of communication. So Western science has perceived germs as something of dangerous, and I think this comes from Louis Pasteur, and he discovered a lot of harmful disease, for example, the chicken pox, or also cattle disease. So most of the disease that are in our domesticated animals, right? And he came up with the germ theory of disease. So to say, I always say that today we have a huge and maybe a misconception of those microbial agency, because microbes, they are utterly different. They have been the first existence of planet Earth, right? They've been existing since about 3 billion years, and they were the agency also of evolution of life as well. And me as an artist, I try to take up these topics, and I really try to speak in their voice. So I always say we are trillions, or we are made of trillions. So not our gut bacteria alone, but also the way how we communicate, maybe it's by a kiss or by a handshake, right? That you also exchange on a different level as well. I started fermenting, especially a lot of drinks. And here I put two pictures in opposition. One is my ferments that I made with funky colors to, it's a kombucha. Maybe you know kombucha. Kombucha is something that we can nowadays buy. It's kind of a hipster drink. It's promoted. It's a bit expensive as well, but it says it's not only tasty, but it also enriches our microbiome and it's healthy. But kombucha is something that I discovered very early. And I started to dig into kombucha because I was fascinated about this glibbery kind of tea mushroom that is growing on the surface of it. It's kind of uncanny and also a bit of like, I don't know what's happening there. It's reproducing, it's growing continuously. So I had this fascination for this more than human existence, right? I often say that the SCOBY, which you also say, it's not a living matter. I always say it's the house of the microbes, but it's actually a fact that even scientists are fascinated that different kinds of microbes, it's not just one species, it's about 400 different species. They collaborate together to form this kind of mantle that is protecting them from the environment. On the other side, you see a picture which is a electronic microscope depiction of lactobacilluses. So to say how scientists also view the bacteria, right? Lactobacillus is that agent that is producing cheese, is producing sauerkraut, is also producing kimchi. And I just wanted to point out here by juxtaposing those two pictures to say that the techniques that we have nowadays to make those pictures, this is maybe 20, 25 years old that we are able to make them visible in such a beautiful way as well. But as I said, Louis Pasteur, he lived 150 years ago. So the perception of bacteria from the scientific world is rather young compared to the practice of human fermentation, right? As humans, we were capable of doing fermentation, I say maybe about 10,000 years. So the first winemaking process, the process of doing makgeolli, maybe you know makgeolli, right? But in Georgia, it was the wine, it was the beer in Europe that took so those people who were doing those drinks in Europe, mostly monks, they had this knowledge, and it was knowledge that was also connected a bit to magic. But they somehow had practices and techniques also to control this very complex process of fermentation. Right, fermentation is not so easy. You have to know certain things like anaerobic states and stuff. But this knowledge was there without knowing who is the real agents and behind that processes, right? So maybe in the Greek temples of Delphi, it was a bit of magic, but the monks, they kept it as a secret knowledge, but it was a way of how to manipulate nature as well. So this is the table I was telling you before. I love to keep it a bit messy and also talk about the diversity of a table that is set by all those different kinds of vegetables. I love to address the ideas of how in the history of human mankind, we had this relationship with nature, especially through food, by breeding our plants and vegetables, right? So I teach a lot of workshops. I give fermentation classes to many people. I teach them about how to do their sauerkraut and kimchi. And somehow it's something that I think I bring back this ancient knowledge because since we have refrigeration systems and we all go shopping at supermarkets, we lost a lot of those knowledge. And here in Korea, like especially now, this is happening that we don't produce the kimchi ourselves anymore. We have ajumas, we have grandmas who did it themselves, but we don't do it anymore. And this is something that my mom, with a migrational background, she transferred it to me because she had to do it herself. There was no market where she could buy the kimchi. she had to learn it utterly herself, like by the arrival to Switzerland. And I always witnessed this process. And when I started to do kimchi, she said, I failed so many times, right? The amount of salt, and it became not moldy, but it didn't taste the way how it should taste and how the memory of taste was, right? Taste is a lot connected to memories. And she always said, like, you have to become kimchi to do good kimchi. So, and thinking this of the perspective of the microbes, it really makes sense. Like you also propagate and you reproduce those bacteria. You live in harmony with them. They become your friends, and you exchange. So within that fermentation practice, I also started to ferment with a Michelin guide chef in Switzerland. This is Stefan Wiesner. He's mainly famous for his fire rings. So he's a chef that is promoting the ideas of alchemy in kitchen. And he works with fire, but also with fungi and lichens. And he uses distilling practices and fermentation. And so he really tries to dig out all those alchemist practices from Europe, right? From back in Europe, maybe, Paracelsus and all those philosophers that were standing at the times of enlightenment. And we really had a nice time. We really enlarged our knowledge together. We exchanged a lot. There was always cats around, right? And he was a huge philanthropist, but having a huge collection of books as well. And I think we shared this, that we really love books and natural practices and taking into account this kind of science that has been somehow not articulated in Western science, because we are not as cutting edge and technological as how science and technology is perceived nowadays. But I think it's important also to say that those techniques have been existing since such a long time. This has been another collaboration. So as I said, I'm rather an artist that doesn't produce so many works, but I do a lot of those knowledge transfers by giving workshops and doing performances and giving talks as well. And so here I started to collaborate with a Korean person, Pyeongso, who is a Korean artist now based in Switzerland. And he wrote an entire thesis on fermentation, and we really matched. And he talks about the concept of social fermentation, right? Because when we ferment, there's much more happening than just the bacteria being active. We both say you always have to ferment in a good mooded state, in a proper environment, and having fun together, which can enhance the taste of your ferments. It's like playing Mozart music to your cheese. I'm sure it also has an effect. But we talk also about community building, right? So the practice of community building is something that I always compare to ancient times when we did fermentation, especially in Europe, where you use fermentation for preserving food for the winter. It has been a lot of work to do, right? So the village would have come together and ferment together, and everybody had to help and work together because it was such an amount of work, right? In the same time, of course, we did food saving. We preserved the abundance of the harvest, and we made it last over the harsh time of winter when there was no access to vitamin C. And in the same time, it was also a great moment of exchanging gossip, right? And so I say, like, fermentation maybe even have been a bit of like this practice of internet, like network buildings, community building, knowledge transfer, especially like females talking behind the hand. And that's the beauty of fermentation and the enjoyable things. Yes. So as you maybe understood, I love those alchemic practices. I love to grow bacteria. I love to experiment with them, not from a scientific background, but also from a grassroots approach or DIY science or DIY biology, you can say. Here I was growing bacteria on pat, so beans. And as you see, it grows a pattern that is really beautiful. And it's the calm yeast when that kind of also is capable of building out this biofilm or bacterial cellulose, again, similar to kombucha. And just underneath that, you see this brown surface, which is this kombucha leather that I started to produce as vegan leather that can replace animal-based leather products, right? It's in the discussion of future making, design making, in this field of artwork arts that I'm working with, a huge discussion that we can produce new materials based on fungi and bacteria. And it talks a lot about how we conquer and process or step beyond the age of petrol or crude oil, right? So in near future, somehow near maybe 250 years, we really have to rethink our society because everything that is made of is based on petrol oil. And we're so thankful that we have this because otherwise the world wouldn't be as shiny colored as we have it now. All the colors and a lot of packing materials, our cars. So plastic is everywhere to imagine. And so we are thinking of like, or experimenting in this topic of how to come up with new materials as well. So I kind of really obsessively got into that topic and produced kombucha on a bigger scale. I built pools that are 2 by 2 meter big, and I made experimentation of growing kombucha on big scale. So to say, to produce this material. And here I made an artwork that has a wooden frame that would expose the kombucha skin on a frame and then light it from the backside. So the round dots that you see there is the babies or the mothers of the kombucha, which grew into this material. I dry it out and it becomes a bit of like an uncanny kind of object that is also comparable to skin. And the shape of the frame maybe is taken from the technique of espalier, which is a technique of growing fruit trees on close to a wall, where you force the tree to grow in a horizontal way, in the shape of sometimes geometrical shapes, and it's a way of producing more fruits because it takes the benefit of the warmth from the walls, but it's also a aestheticization of those plants, right? So here I'm very interested in this idea of how humans again like control and manipulate nature, right? So that's also a thing that I'm doing. I'm trying to manipulate nature by growing this bacterial celluloses, and yes, and a procession of the working with the cellulose and the bacteria was the Untitled 2 skin, which were within this discussion of producing bacterial cellulose as a leather. There is often the question, but is it durable? Is it lasting? Is it not dissolving again if it's exposed to water? And yes, it is a problematic that all the biomaterials that we are producing as a successor to plastic, they are not as lasting as plastic, right? Plastic has been something that humans invented and is one of the most durable thing, which now also becomes our destiny, that everything becomes plastic, right? Even us with microplastic intake and stuff. So in this work, which I show you here, I exposed one of my skins on top of a metal sculpture. And in the same time, it was exhibited for the period of 3 weeks. And it was exposed to nature conditions like rain. It was summertime, so we had a lot of summer storms. We had the heat. We had the brutal shape of like sun exposing it directly. And for me it was experimentation just to see also to threaten this kind of object, right? To really go into the other extreme and say that I will see of what's happening with the material if it's really exposed so harshly to nature. So again, like a very human and brutal, almost violent gesture for those things. And I measured also the environmental data. So I measured temperature and humidity and volatile compounds because kombucha is a bit smelly. And now I'm processing those data into, I want to do a sound piece. So still it's a work in progress. So here, this was a performance that I did at the Kunsthalle Bern. And in Kunsthalle Bern, I had eggs as a topic because I wanted to address the idea of single-celled life, right? And as I said before, bacteria are very ancient, they're very old. Humans are belonging to the kingdom of animals. So we are existing of many, many cellular, millions of cells. But the single cell life, which is the agent in kombucha that you also see in the background, there's a basin of kombucha that is growing. Life is perceived differently. And one of the bigger differences is that single cell life, they just clone themselves, right? And we have to reproduce by making love and fusing two DNAs together to become or to produce a new DNA. So it was a rather complex work that was talking also about how we are using our animals in our food system. So I draw on each of the eggs, I draw a small little face. And at the end, I also asked people to ferment the eggs in a mountain of salt. So I had three different sized, no, same sized pools. One was growing kombucha, one was filled with eggs, and the other one was filled with salt, where I asked actively the audience to come and pickle egg yolk, right? And so at the end, I ended up with a lot of egg white because we saved the egg white. And I somehow didn't know what to do exactly. So I just thought of a recipe. And here I did a lot of meringue. So I had about maybe it was 2 kilograms of egg white that I transformed into meringue. And I had quite a lot of fun of creating different shapes and really playing around with the meringue. And this is somehow a piece that is now hanging in my studio. I'm not sure how long it's lasting, but it's really also circular in that way that it's saving foods and it's a way of becoming creative with foods as well. Yeah. That was the third work that was as a result from the performance at Kunsthalle Bern. And it was a kombucha actually. But what happened is because I fermented, it was a fail, right? Maybe you saw the green dots and you saw it became moldy. So I was growing the kombucha in an open pond, and with the many people who were participating in the performance with the egg yolk, they also brought a lot of bacteria and yeast and fungi, and I didn't protect it properly. So that's a fail of how sometimes it can happen in fermentation. And so the museum, they called me up like a few days later and said like, hey, you have to come. It's not good. And so I drove down to Bern and I saw, because first we thought, maybe we can save it because I wanted to have a new skin, right? I wanted to produce a new kombucha leather. And we checked the phones and they sent me a picture and I looked up and I proposed something to do, how to save it. Maybe you just submerge it into the water and it can work. But at the end we decided, no, we have to break down this experimentation. And while I was there, by chance, I had my camera with me. So I asked the technician to clean it up, right? And because the mold is already growing, you have to be very cautious before it spreads all the spore into the airs, right? So I asked him to very cautiously put a layer on top of the other layer and fold it together, right? And somehow it's by chance it just became a nice video where at the end it reminds me a bit of like placentas, right? So the inside or the what is life, right? And I think that's the beauty about working with biology and with those agency of microbes and bacteria that we don't really understand what they are, and they're very uncanny towards ourselves, and especially because of the notion that there is the invisibility of them, right? So making them visible is one of the things that I really love. I do videos with them. I have lots of photography, and it's a way also of playing around with them. It's a bit alchemy and witchcraft, but it's quite a lot of fun. Another work that I came up with, and which is also the work that I'm exhibiting now in the exhibition, is this idea of cyanobacteria and photosynthesis, right? Cyanobacteria are the first microbes that can do photosynthesis. They can take the energy from the sun and they transform into existence that doesn't is dependent on intake of nutrients or energy from by eating, but just by sun. So I come up with this idea of like the Homo photosyntheticus, asking about what would it mean if humans also become photosynthetic, right? If we could cross the border between the animal kingdom and the plant kingdom, and we can take energy from the sun. It would be an easy life. We would just lie on the beach and maybe just bath ourselves, and maybe we also the agriculture system would become obsolete, right? We don't need to transform our terrestrial surface and soils. We can just let the plant grow and make nice gardens out of it. So just for pleasure as well. And I am studying seaweed also from a food aspect. So as I said, Korea and China and Japan, East Asian countries, they are very big in this knowledge of how to eat seaweed as well. Seaweed is an aquatic existence. It's actually around the world. You have kelp forests all over the world, but mainly Asian culture kept the tradition of eating seaweed. Again, this conception of what is edible. And so I started a series of giving workshops, not teaching people how to eat seaweed, but mainly in Asia, I ask people to teach me how to eat seaweed. And it's again this change of agriculture system, like the impact of our footprint, and therefore also creating new recipes, mainly fusion recipes of eating seaweed for Western culture and the Western tongue, right? Because that's interesting. Humans have all five taste buds. We taste bitter, sweet, sour, salty, and umami. Spicy is different, but we have different connotations of what is tasty and what is food, right? So it's a very deeply inscribed into our cultural knowledge. And I created herbal butters with seaweed, of course, and eggs that are infused with seaweed. We had focaccia with spirulina. So I was cooking a lot with spirulina and focaccia, and then also we dig into the topic of algae blooms, and we give a lot of workshops where we go to sweetwater bodies, so to say lakes and rivers, and talk about the change of our environment. Because nowadays seaweed somehow is a future prospect of how it can save our environment and replace petrol and all that thing. In the same time, it's also threatening, right? We have algae blooms, it's extinctioning fishes and aqua plants and all that stuff. And it's somehow a new existence of life that us humans, we are unfamiliar with. And so we do this workshop where we talk about seaweed, and we make people also witness microalgae and water plants by microscoping them, by doing pH tests, and really learning a bit more about the science, what is behind of it. Because I think if people learn more about science, they also grasp it more and they understand it more. It's like how food also, when we eat food, we ingest it to digest it. And by digestion, there comes this idea of like perceiving it and understanding it, right? So this idea. So we did a lot of research where we did interviews with scientists, and here is example how scientists currently are sending seaweed into space. Seaweed as spirulina is sent in bioreactors to space to feed the astronauts, but in the same time they also use the wastewater from the astronauts to create a circular system, a closed system, where spirulina is using this wastewater as food. and then producing oxygen and then feeding back the astronauts. This, when we fly to Mars, we have to somehow be circular, right? And that's the interesting thing. Earth is doing this, right? If you think in a more macro scale, like Earth is really doing this. That was a research with scientists from Zurich. They produce fuel algae ponds where they grow microalgae as a source of biofuel. It's quite fascinating to see it. The color, it's so green, it's so beautiful. And they said that algae actually has the potential to replace mineral oils because it bears 80% of its body is oils, right? So eating algae is super healthy for us, but also it can really produce energy. So those interviews we collected in a database, it's a knowledge base that we sometimes expose, where we make those interviews accessible to the audience. It takes a bit of time to watch them. You have to listen to those interviews. But we really ask scientists from Switzerland, France, Japan, but also artists and their take of how they see seaweed. Because as fermentation, as seaweed, there's many artists addressing this agency for going into the future. Yes. That's the installation that you can see now at ICEA. And here I try to create a media kitchen. I call it a media kitchen. So it's a kitchen that is entirely designed on the computer, and it's a kitchen that is kind of prospecting the future of eating of this so-called Homo photosyntheticus. Because when we would change into Homo photosyntheticus, our physiognomy is also changed, right? So this question of like how the body is changing, maybe we don't need hands anymore because we don't need to eat. Maybe yes. So we created some hands, but we also created future tools of like, what are the tools of it? And this is one part of the installation. It still exists of two other parts. One is a biolab, and you can see it, and we've been exhibiting it in several places. This is at the Swiss Embassy in France. It was a very prestigious place. We had the back set of troubadour painting and carpets. It was really incredible. And we made a food performance where we served a meal course of 3 different meals with different recipes. And we talked about threats from the future, like toxicity from radioactivity or toxicity from algae blooms. But in the same time, people would eat the food as well, right? So it was playing on a level of aesthetics, but also performativity of the food as well. Yes. So I have when I do food performances, the food has to be tasty. So I really want people to enjoy the performance as well, and also to create the ambiguity of like enjoyment, but also perceiving like so sometimes dystopic topics as well. So really going into the future about seeing that pleasure is something very important. So we created a film also from out of all this material and this research that has been ongoing for 3 years. And this research has been mainly done in Japan, where we went to the traces of nori production, or kim here in Korea, right? Kim is produced in Korea, Japan, and China. I think Korea is the biggest producer, exporter around the world compared to maybe China. I'm not so sure. I think Korea is bigger. But Kim has an interesting history because Kim, in the thinking of agriculture, it doesn't need any addition of fertilizers. So how we produce Kim is we just throw the nets into the oceans and we pray to God and hope that the nori is mingling on the nets and it's growing into it. And there was a crisis so we did, this is a picture of the workshops that we did where I asked Japanese people how to cook. We also interviewed Yamamoto Noriten, which is the famous nori producer that serves even the emperor with his noris. So very delicacy. He talked about the different tastes of nori. And we interviewed a fishery association that created a monument because this story of Kathleen Drew Baker. So Kathleen Drew Baker, when I said about how people produced nori before by praying, there was a moment of crisis exactly after the Second World War, because the main production area of nori is in Ariake Bay, which is close to Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and also the many bombings that happened from the American allies. The floor of the ocean got disrupted so much that this nori industry had a crisis for several years. Nori was not growing. And there comes Kathleen Drew Baker, who was a British scientist, a female scientist, who really was a specialist in nori, a geek into nori, that she was the first person who could grow nori in vitro inside her lab. And she did this by finding out that the nori seedlings life cycle of seaweed is very complex. It's not a plant, it's a protocyst. So it's propagating similar to a fungi by spores and then by cloning and gametophytes. And so she found out that it is a symbiosis with oyster shells, right? And she was this knowledge then got discovered by her article got discovered by Japanese scientists, and they were so thankful for her knowledge and also spreading this technique around Japan. Even it spread to Korea, even it spread to China, that she received a monument where every year on the 16th of April there's a Shinto ceremony held in the name for her, right? And she somehow become this mother of the sea. And yes, that's the Shinto ceremony. And yes, we could, that's a bit of the inside. We film a lot of like industry as well. And this is the new generation of nori producer talking also about climate change and the threat of climate change for nori. And we can now watch yes.
Tides, floodings, algae blooms,
神様というのはいろんな方がおられるわけですけど、ここは海上安全とそれから海苔の生産と
網の下にその海苔の赤ちゃんが入っている貝をぶら下げるという養殖方法をとっていて、それでドリューさんのおかげでそれから海苔の収穫量がどんどん広がっていきまして。
Essential amino acids that we need for life, right?
With global warming and algae blooms, today's nori producers have to reinvent themselves. Can we imagine human resilient systems still in line with a functional and evolutionary ecology in order to help our living environments to regenerate?
Thank you so much. Now we can start with the Q&A.